Okay, we have to read it. Okay, okay.
The concentration of the mind and the training of the will towards the reception of the truth and living in the truth is also an evident result. A perpetual necessity of these pursuits, and at the end or in their highest intensities, they may and do lead first to an intellectual, then to a reflective perception of the divine reality, which may culminate in a sort of preliminary identification with it. But all this cannot go beyond a certain point. The systematic purification of the whole being for an integral reflection and taking in of the divine reality can only be done by the special method of yoga. Its absolute concentration has to take the place of the dispersed concentration of the lower knowledge, the vague and ineffective identification which is all the lower knowledge can bring, has to be replaced by the complete, intimate, imperative, and living union with yoga beings, which
Okay.
yoga brings, sorry.
Yeah, lovely. So, a very interesting para, but we have to. I can't give you the summary of this because I don't have it now. But the what he is discussing the higher and the lower knowledge, and he has also told you that the lower knowledge and pursued fully can also lead to the higher knowledge. How he is explaining here in 3 different stages. Okay, so what those stages are, we'll have a look also at. The concentration of the mind, our mind at our level, because the mind is constantly flitting between and it's very, very unsteady. So it goes on from one thought to another thought and there's a constant movement in the mind. So we have to learn to concentrate this uh, many branching thought process. We have to bring all that down to one. There are many, many methods to do that, but one thing is to concentrate on one thing at a time. Okay, the concentration of the mind and the training of the will towards the reception of the truth. So, first, we are not receiving the truth at all. We are not receiving the truth at all. We are only receiving the impacts from the physical world, and we are thinking it is real. So, slowly, slowly, when you concentrate in the mind, and the mind starts losing its diversification, okay, it's going outward going movements and starts becoming more and more from an obtuse angle, it starts becoming an acute angle. Okay, it starts concentrating on something. And the training of the will towards the reception of the truth. So you want the truth and you have to receive it. The truth is coming to you all the time, but we don't know how to receive it. It's a concentration of the mind and the training of the will slowly, slowly starts opening, and how also he is telling you one by one. We'll see that. And living in the truth. So not only receiving the truth, but ultimately living in the truth. First of all, you only receive the truth. Sometimes you may not even accept the truth. Okay. And the truth is what is very interesting. What is meant by truth? That means in every movement of our thought, our emotion, and our action, there is something which is right and there is something which is wrong. Not from the moral point of view, but from the spiritual point of view. So that is you are receiving the truth. When certain, let us say you have a certain desire for something. And then if the truth is not received, you will go ahead and do that desire, you will fulfill the desire. But then if the truth is received, it may say, this desire is not to be fulfilled. That is, you are receiving the truth. Okay? So that is the receiving of the truth. And then finally, living in the truth. Actually, when you have received the truth, you practice it. That's a living in the truth. See how precise with the language is. So, reception of the truth and living in the truth is also an evident result, a perpetual necessity of these pursuits. In other words, he is talking of the external, all the lower knowledge. You remember, he has dealt with art, philosophy, science, okay? All these things he has dealt with one by one. And he's told you that these things also can be pursued, because he's telling you very clearly that the world is our lower knowledge need not be rejected. But the idea should be that through the lower knowledge also I am seeking the truth all the time. If that happens, then it's a perpetual necessity. You must constantly think of I want the truth, true action, true action. And at the end, or in their highest intensities, they may and do lead first to an intellectual. So when you are receiving the truth, it is the mind that tells you this is right and that is not correct. Okay. Then, first of all, it is intellectual, stage number 1. Stage number 2, there's a reflective perception of the divine reality, but it's in bits and pieces. It's not in full. It's a reflection, but even that is good. The reception is very good. In the spiritual planes, you are receiving, reflecting, you are receiving the reflections, perception of the divine reality, which may culminate, third level, in a sort of preliminary identification level. Third level, I'm now using the word level in a different way, okay? Because this is a preliminary identification. That means partly you are experiencing the divine realization. But all this cannot go beyond a certain point, because you are going from the outer lower nature and slowly trying to turn that lower nature into the real spiritual truth. So beyond a certain point. Then what do you do? Then the systematic purification of the whole being for an integral reflection. So first of all, there's a reception of the truth, then there is living in the truth, then it's an intellectual understanding, and then finally a semi-reflection, and then finally that reflection will become much more intense. Okay, and then finally you have, if you start doing the systematic purification, that's a real yoga you have started of the whole for an integral reflection. Now the reflection is full, not half. And taking in of the divine reality can only be done by the special methods of yoga. So now the yoga comes into the picture. Okay. The earlier, when you are trying to go to the truth through the lower knowledge, art, philosophy, science, okay, all this morality, philosophy, all these things, it is only in the beginning, we are not doing yoga. Now if you want to go further, you have to do yoga. And yoga, there are many, many methods. So it depends on what you select. Its absolute concentration of the yoga has to take the place of the dispersed concentrations. Our normal mind is very dispersed, divagating. It is going here and there all the time. As I said, obtuse, going beyond the 90-degree angle. It's all going out like that. So it has to all come inwards and not outwards. It has become sharp. Okay. Its absolute concentration has to take the place of the dispersed concentrations of the lower nature. The vague, lower knowledge. The vague and ineffective identification, which is all the lower knowledge can bring, has to be replaced by the complete, intimate, imperative, and living union which yoga brings. So, even those who are doing ordinary life, it is not necessary to give it up. But the first movement is, I want to know the truth in everything. What am I doing? Even if you are a doctor or an engineer, okay? Suppose you are treating a patient. Okay? Then you appeal to the divine, give me the right diagnosis. Okay? So that would be seeking the truth. Then finally, if you are open enough, then even an idea may come in. Oh, this could be the problem. That could be the problem. Okay? Then you see that it was right. So it's a reflection of the truth, receiving in the mind. Then finally, when you start seeing that these things are becoming, then the interest in yoga becomes much more intense, and you start doing the specialized methods of yoga. In the beginning, you are pursuing only lower knowledge, the truth in the lower knowledge. You are not doing yoga. But when you start doing yoga, you have to purify yourself. And what are the methods of purification? We have already dealt with that. Concentration, purification, we have seen all that. Okay. There are many, many ways. Sacrifice is one way, concentration another way. Okay, so there are so many. Giving of oneself. All these are methods. So finally, the vague and ineffective identification, which is you are identifying yourself, but it's not having an effect in the physical world, which is all the lower knowledge can bring, has to be replaced by the complete, intimate, imperative, and living union with your awareness. So Emily has given all this in 10 lines in one small paragraph, but it's a work of lifetimes. Okay? And if you are very, very intense, maybe it can be done only in one lifetime. But that is not very easy. Particularly, it is not easy in the integral yoga because the concentration is on so many things in the mind, in the heart, so it takes much longer time in the integral yoga than in the traditional yogas. Traditional yogas, you are cutting out so many things. Okay, that's why it's easy. So we can read the next one. Nevertheless, yoga does not.
Okay, Rangata, I'm reading now.
Yes, yes.
Nevertheless,
Yeah.
nevertheless, yoga does not either in its path or in its attainment exclude and throw away the forms of the lower knowledge, except when it takes the shape of an extreme asceticism or a mysticism altogether intolerant of this other divine mystery of the world existence. It separates itself from them by the intensity, largeness, and height of its objective, and the specialization of its method to suit its aim. But it not only starts from them, but for a certain part of the way carries them with it and uses them as auxiliaries. Thus, it is evident how largely ethical thought and practice, not so much external as internal conduct, enter into the preparatory method of yoga, into its aim at purity. Again, the whole method of yoga is psychological. It might almost be termed the consummate practice of a perfect psychological knowledge. The data of philosophy are the supports from which it begins in the realization of God through the principles of his being. Only it carries the intelligent understanding, which is all philosophy gives, into an intensity which carries it beyond thought into vision and beyond understanding into realization and possession. What philosophy leaves abstract and remote, it brings into a living nearness and spiritual concreteness. The aesthetic and emotional mind and aesthetic forms are used by yoga as a support for concentration, even in the yoga of knowledge, and are sublimated the whole means of the yoga of love and delight, as life and action sublimated are the whole means of the yoga of works. Contemplation of God in nature, contemplation and service of God in man and in the life of man and of the world in its past, and of the world in its past, present, and future are equally elements of which the yoga of knowledge can make use to complete the realization of God in all things. Only all is directed to the one aim, directed towards God, filled with the idea of the divine, infinite, universal existence, so that the outward going, sensuous, pragmatical preoccupations of the lower knowledge with phenomena and forms is replaced by the one divine preoccupation. After attainment, the same character remains. The yogin continues to know and see God in the finite and be a channel of God consciousness and God action in the world. Therefore, the knowledge of the world and the enlarging and uplifting of all that appertains to life comes within his scope. Only in all he sees God, sees the supreme reality, and his motive of work is to help mankind towards the knowledge of God and the possession of the supreme reality. He sees God through the data of science, God through the conclusions of philosophy, God through the forms of beauty and the forms of good, God in all the activities of life, God in the past of the world and its effect, in the present and its tendencies, in the future and its great progression. Into any or all of these, he can bring his illumined vision and his liberated power of the spirit. The lower knowledge has been the step from which he has risen to the higher. The higher illumines for him the lower and makes it part of itself, even if only its lower fringe and most external radiation.
That completes the chapter.
Yeah.
Very big para where he is going step by step. So we'll have a look at what he said. So he has told you before that the integral yoga does not necessarily reject the lower knowledge. All the activities of the physical world, whatever you are doing, you can continue to do that and slowly graduate to the yogic approach. That's what he has said. And in the previous para that we read, concentration of the mind, and he has told us how that can take place. Try to, whatever, whether you are an engineer or you are a doctor or you are a teacher or whatever, try to see the truth in whatever you are doing. In the beginning, it's only intellectual, but slowly, the concentration of the mind is there all the time seeking for truth and training your will to also seek for truth. Then slowly it starts becoming more and more inner knowledge and less lower knowledge. The lower knowledge gets illuminated by the higher truths. That's what he said. Now, we read each sentence. Nevertheless, yoga does not, either in its path or in its attainment, exclude and throw away the forms of the lower knowledge. Look at what Mara was doing and what Sri Aurobindo was doing. They never stopped doing what they were doing. Sri Aurobindo was writing poetry, okay, and he was actually also engaged in freeing his country, but he never stopped in spite of so many experiences. Even after the Baroda experience of the Nirvana, he continued until he was commanded by the divine to do work elsewhere. If Sri Krishna had not told him that now you stop the revolutionary work and go and do yoga and bring down the supermind, if he had not told him that, he would have continued in the freedom movement. But he was told very clearly, your area of work is elsewhere. This is a much lower work and you don't need to waste your time here. Go and do the higher work which others can't do. Okay? So that's exactly what Sri is saying. Yoga does not, either in its path, that means the process, or the attainment, okay, even after the attainment, exclude and throw away the forms of the lower knowledge. You can continue to do what you do, except when it takes the shape of an extreme asceticism or a mysticism altogether intolerant of this other divine mystery of the world existence. So it depends on the individual, and if the individual feels that the world is absolute perversion and ignorance and darkness, then this thing does not apply. But the integral yoga, because he has not used the word integral yoga, he is using the word yoga. Okay? Does not either in its path or its. But the integral yoga definitely does not reject the physical world, except when it takes the shape of an extreme asceticism or a mysticism altogether intolerant of this other divine mystery of the world existence. Both are mysteries. Above is also a mystery and the lower also is a mystery. But then the integral yoga does not reject the lower existence. It separates itself from them by the intensity, largeness, and height of its objective and the specialization of its methods to suit its aim. So, this is what he's saying is very interesting. It separates itself, does not reject. Okay, note it. Even in the interior yoga, the separation is necessary. but not the rejection. Okay? That's interesting. You separate yourself from it. In one of my other classes, there is one boy who constantly asks this. Is not the rejection of the physical world also the beginning in the integral yoga? So now this sentence actually explains that. There is a separation. You separate yourself from your body, mind, life, knowing that these are not the truths, but you don't reject them. You watch and think that they are instruments. They are not, this is not me. Separation. It separates itself from them by the intensity, largeness, and height of its objective, and specialization of its methods to suit its aim. But it not only starts from them, but for a certain part of the way, carries them with it and uses them as auxiliaries. Now look at that. Sri Aurobindo, even almost towards the end of his life, he is writing poetry. Strictly speaking, poetry need not be an activity of the yoga. It need not be. There are so many yogis who are not written poetry, but it can only be made part of yoga. Every activity can be made part of yoga. That's exactly the point of this whole chapter, higher and lower knowledge. Okay, so, but for a certain part of the way, carries with it and uses them as auxiliaries. Okay. Use, even writing of poetry can make your consciousness pure, and it can even heighten. It can take you to higher heights. Thus, it is evident how largely ethical thought and practice. In other words, morality. He has told you very clearly earlier that morality is not spirituality, but even morality can take you to a higher level. Okay? Thus, it is evident how largely ethical thought and practice, not so much external as internal conduct. Now, what do I mean by that? We'll finish the sentence and come back to it. Not so much external as internal conduct. Enter into the preparatory method of yoga, into its aim at purity. Okay? And practice at purity. Practice at purity. That's the sentence. So, what he's saying is that the external is the non-doing of sin in morality. Okay? But that is okay. That doesn't solve the problem of the inner. The desire may still be there, but you don't indulge the desire. So Srimad is saying it is not so much the external as the internal conduct. You get rid of the desire itself in your root, okay, inside you, not the outer. Okay? It is good to not to indulge in the desire outwardly also, but that could be a suppression. Whereas if you cut it at the root of the desire itself, when the desire comes up, reject it. When the desire comes up, reject it. That is the internal contact, okay, not the external. That's what he's saying. And they enter into the preparatory method of yoga. So even morality, which is rejected in the spiritual life, ultimately has its purpose and its preliminary usefulness. Again, the whole method of yoga is psychological. So it is not so much the external, but the psychological. Okay. Then you have to work on yourself entirely. You don't need to do pranayama. You don't need to do asanas. It's entirely psychological. Okay. It might also be termed the consummate practice of a perfect psychological knowledge. So psychological is the integral yoga that you can say that when your psychological knowledge is perfect, that is the consummation of the yogic practice. Because when you have the perfect knowledge, naturally a practice also comes. Perfect. If it's not perfect, it's another matter. The data or the data, whatever you want to pronounce it, of philosophy are the supports from which it begins in the realization of God through the principles of his being. So, even philosophy, which is intellectual knowledge, but if it is very, very keenly pursued, that will obviously take you to the reality, because the philosophy is dealing with what is reality, what is knowledge. So naturally, if you follow it perfectly, even that will lead you to God. The data of philosophy are the supports from which it begins in the realization of God through the principles of his being. The principles, there are principles of mind, there are principles of vital, there are principles even of the action in the physical body. Only it carries the intelligent understanding, which is all philosophy gives. Only an intellectual understanding, intelligent understanding. That's what philosophy gives you. Into an intensity which carries it beyond thought, into vision. So now he's telling you the difference between the intellectual pursuit of truth and the spiritual pursuit of truth. So I have made a chart which I am telling you. The lower knowledge is in thinking, in understanding, and it is abstract and remote. But the higher knowledge, thought turns into vision, understanding becomes realization or possession, and abstract becomes absolutely concrete, living nearness. So this is the difference between the lower knowledge and the higher knowledge. Thought becomes vision, understanding becomes realization and possession. And what is abstract becomes absolutely spiritual concreteness. That's the difference. So it can, all lower knowledge can ultimately end in spiritual knowledge. That's what he's saying. But it's not that simple. He's saying it in 2 sentences here, but it'll take you maybe a couple of lifetimes. But doesn't matter, it is worth it. The pursuit is worth it. The aesthetic, so he has told it's philosophy, now he comes to art. Okay, he has listed all these things earlier, if you remember. So now he comes to the art thing. The aesthetic and emotional mind and aesthetic forms are used by yoga as a support for concentration, even in the yoga of knowledge. Even when you're doing yoga of knowledge, the artistic tendency in you, the mother was an artist, okay, and she's using that for purpose of yoga, are used by yoga as a support for concentration, even in the yoga of knowledge, and are sublimated, made more subtle, okay, sublimated. The whole means of the yoga of love and delight, as life and action, sublimated, are the whole means of the yoga of works. So when you're engaged in art, it will open up your love and delight and bliss. Just as if you are life and action also, when it is made subtle, it becomes a yoga of what's karma. Contemplation of God in nature, contemplation and service of God in man, and in the life of man and of the world in its past, present, and future are the equally elements, are equally, not equally, are equally elements of which the yoga of knowledge can make use to complete the realization of God in all things. Read that sentence carefully again. He's saying concentration of God in nature. That means the outer. You are seeing the God in nature, cosmic. Contemplation and service of God in man, inside yourself, individual, and in the life of man and of the world in its past, present, and future are equally elements of the yoga of knowledge. So, can make use to complete the realization of God in all things. Only all is directed to the one aim, directed towards God, filled with the idea of the divine, infinite, universal existence, so that the outward going, sensuous, pragmatical preoccupation of the lower knowledge with phenomena and forms is replaced by the one divine preoccupation. So, when you are continuing your profession, okay, medicine or engineering are the only 2 things I want to say, because but it can be anything. It can be teaching, it can be even working in a factory, everything, whatever. All activities are permissible. So, from the outward, look at the usage. Okay? Outward going, that's a lower knowledge. Okay, our normal way of looking at the world. Sensuous, is affecting the senses. Pragmatic, very practical preoccupation of the lower knowledge with phenomena and forms is replaced by the one divine preoccupation. Whatever you are doing, you are turning it to the divine. After attainment, the same character remains. Even after you have attained and you have got the realization of the divine, you can continue, he's saying, with the outer activity. You need not reject it. Okay? So, after attainment, the same character remains. Even after attainment, you don't need to see anymore. Many yogas say, after you have gained the realization of God, there is no work to be done in the physical world. That is their way. But Srila is saying, no, you can continue to do your work. Okay. That's what he's saying in this sentence. The yogin continues to know and see God in the finite and be a channel of God consciousness and God action in the world. So you become a channel and God is acting through you and you become an instrument of the divine. Because you are doing the God action. God is telling you what He is using your body, mind, life purified as a puppet, and it's a very, very happy condition because the divine is using you as an instrument for His work in the world. There is a beautiful passage in Savitri where the divine is telling Savitri, I will use you as my soul, I will use you as my instrument, I will pour my cruel kindness, I will pour on you. So these fantastic statements in Savitri, towards the end. Okay. So that passage, about 1.5 pages, that's exactly what he's saying here also in different ways. The yogin continues to know and to see God in the finite and be a channel for God consciousness and God action in the world. Therefore, the knowledge of the world and the enlarging and uplifting of all that appertains to life, that belongs to life, that belongs or relates to God. That's the word appertain. To God comes within his scope. So the integral yoga need not, but sometimes speaking here all Jnana Yoga also, all this is Jnana Yoga. You say even that can slowly turn you to, you don't need to give it the physical. Only in all he sees God, sees the supreme reality, and his motive of work is to help mankind towards the knowledge of God and the possession of the supreme reality. This is the, to help mankind is the Gita's idea. Sarva loka hite rata. You are engaged in the good of all mankind towards the knowledge of God. And also the Gita says that in 2 words. One is Sarva loka hite rata and the other one is the loka sangrahanartham. Okay? To continue and the action in the physical world. You must not give it up. He sees God through the data of science. Now he's come to science. He is repeating what he said earlier, philosophy, art, and science. Okay? He sees God through the data of science, God through the conclusions of philosophy, God through the forms of beauty and the forms of good, God in all the activities of life, God in the past of the world and its effects in the present and its tendencies in the future and its great progression. So identify the things he has spoken of earlier. God, he sees God through the data of science. Okay? And science can be any science, he told you. God through the conclusion of philosophy. Okay, that also. All these are outward knowledges. God through the forms of beauty, art, and the forms of good. What are the forms of good? The morality. God in all the activities of life. God in the past of the world and its effects. God in the past of its effects, history. Okay. God in the past of the world is its history. So even that is also part of the spiritual life. And its effects. In the present and its tendencies. So in the present and tendencies, how the improvement in the physical world can take place in the future, and its great progression. Into any or all of these, he can bring his illumined vision and his liberated power of the spirit. Now, the concluding sentence. The lower knowledge has been the step from which he has risen to the higher. The higher illumines for him the lower and makes it part of itself, even if only its lower fringe and most external radiation. So, the question arises, he is laying so much stress on the not leaving the world, but is it necessary that you must first of all get lower knowledge and then only get higher knowledge? No, that's not necessary. Note interestingly how Ramakrishna was even uneducated. Even that Sai Baba also, he was just someone sitting in the mosque, and he had so much of knowledge he acquired afterwards. So it is not absolutely essential. But if you have started life as a normal human being, and you are as you said, any profession, you can do yoga. That's the whole point. There is no distinction between worldly life and spiritual life. That's what it is. Okay. Now there are, I think, only 2 chapters left, and then he will go on to the yoga of love. So next is samadhi. So it's already 8:40. So next time we start the chapter samadhi, the different types of samadhis, and then finally he ends with Raj Yoga. Okay, that ends in volume 1. Raj Yoga, what it is, that also we will have a brief look at it. Because he is discussing this whole section that we read for so many days. It is the Jnana Yoga part, the works of knowledge. Then he will come to the works of love. Okay, so au revoir everybody. Have a nice day.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you, Rangada.
Thank you, Rangada.
Thank you, Rangada.